Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me on another episode of Round the Fire with King Safaris. I am, of course, your host, Jono McHugh. Now, today's episode is one that I have been extremely excited for. I've been waiting to do it for a long time. I've tried many different ways to get in contact with my guest today. He's a very popular person, he's a very busy person, so I'm extremely excited for this episode. Um, as many of you know, we are a Africa hunting podcast. I generally try and avoid politics as much as I can. I'm not afraid to speak about politics. I quite enjoy it, but I'm a firm believer of stay in your lane, keep opinion to yourself unless you know what you're talking about. Hence, I wanted to bring on my guest today. This is somebody that I have followed for a very long time. I enjoy his videos. I enjoy his insights into South Africa. It's fun, phenomenal, and he's full of a wealth of knowledge, and I hope that he could share a lot of his views with us today, because what happens is every time you get around the fire after a hunt, the golden rule is never talk about politics, never talk about religion. And what happens after a couple of castle lights, few brandies, everything gets thrown around with politics, and we're deep into it. So I thought I'd bring on my guest today, Colonel Chris Wyatt, to give us a good insight into South African politics and the relationship between the US and South Africa. So without further ado, Colonel Chris Wyatt, thank you very, very much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it.
Well, Jono, it's my pleasure. I have to say that my lane's pretty wide, so I don't think I have to worry straying out of my lane. But I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think we'll have a good discussion tonight. I'm happy to talk about anything you'd like to talk about. And I think you wanted me to tell people a little about myself who don't know me. Maybe you want me to do that now? Okay, excellent.
Yes, please, if you could.
Sure. I have an incredibly long CV. It's 14 pages long, so we'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version as best I can here. I'm obviously an American. I grew up here in the United States exclusively, but as a child, I've lived all over the country in over 30 different states. I attended 34 or 38 elementary and primary school or junior high schools. It's crazy. Sometimes I go to school for a week and then move. I was always the new kid, skinny and outcast sort of thing. Had to learn to adapt and become a chameleon and fit in with all the time. So I learned on the fly. Wound up living in rural Appalachian High School and ran a dairy farm, which was interesting. I learned an awful lot about the value of hard work and respect for the land and became a conservationist, not an environmentalist, but a conservationist. There's a big difference. We're not wackos. We believe the earth is here for our use. We just take care of it. Then I ran off to university at the age of 17 and went a full ride, scholarships and grants and such because I was dirt poor. And spent a year in university, chased girls and didn't go to class. And so I had very poor marks. And as the year progressed, I realized I was wasting my time and other people's money. So I decided to go back to what I was really going to try to do is go in the Army. At the time, unemployment was very high and the prime lending rate was very high. And back in my county, it's 26% unemployment, which is unheard of. And the prime lending rate was 15%. I didn't own any land. So my options were pretty limited. So I went in the Army to get money for college and also to serve and learn what it's like to be as an enlisted soldier, because my ultimate goal was to be a leader in the Army. So I went into the Army. I went to Germany, spent a few years there, came back, went to university, fixed all my grades, graduated with high honors, came back in the Army as an intelligence officer in 1989, and then retired in 2019. I spent 23 of my 36 years in the Army overseas. I did 3 tours in Germany, in Bad Kreuznach, in Rheinland-Pfalz, in Hanau and Gelnhausen in Hesse, and then finally in Stuttgart as a private to sergeant, then a lieutenant to captain, and then as a lieutenant colonel, the last one. I did a tour of duty in Italy. And then in Africa, I was stationed in Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, Ethiopia. And I'm a published author in academic circles, including by Stellenbosch University and the Army War College. I taught at the Army War College here, worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency, where I ran a $3 billion program, 60 billion rand. And I've worked HIV programs, tuberculosis programs. I'm a counterintelligence agent, a federal law enforcement official. I've hunted terrorists. I've taught foreign military academies and at the G5 Sahel College in Mauritania. Anyway, I've done a lot of things. It's been a very interesting ride. I'm an energy industry analyst. I'm a rugby enthusiast and a rugby journalist. I'm accredited with the Bulls at Loftus and also with 5 of the Major League Rugby franchises here in America. And I go to the Sevens, the World Cup. I've been to every World Cup since 2011. Plus, I've been to the Women's World Cups, except the one in New Zealand because they moved it, and the Sevens World Cups in San Francisco and Cape Town. And I think you get the picture. And I did a little hunting when I was young. I used to have 30 rifles and shotguns, but they all disappeared over the years as I couldn't take them with me around the world. So my stepfather always like, yeah, so-and-so wants to buy your 12 gauge. You want to sell it? and I knew that that was we need money at home. Can we sell it and keep the money? So yeah, so that's kind of what we did. But much to my surprise, I found out recently that my sister who lives in Ohio, she's the only relative left in Ohio. That's where I was in high school. My little sister, she's like, there's a 22 long rifle pump action. I said, a Montgomery Ward. She goes, yeah. I said, yeah, that's mine. That was my first ever rifle. So that's still
Wow.
around. So I'm going to collect that from Ohio here one day. But
Fantastic.
anyway, most people think I have an arsenal in my house. No, I just have crew serve weapons like that movie Congo mounted out front to take out the silverbacks. And that's a little bit about me.
I love it. And I'm sure everybody listening now is just absolutely agreeing with me for bringing you onto the show, because your vast knowledge and insight is kind of what's needed to really explain the complexity of South African politics. And as I said earlier, you know, when you're in the game as a professional hunter, it's drilled into you. Don't bring up politics. Don't bring up religion on the fire. You don't know what arguments you're going to get into. You don't want to upset the client. And as I said, I've had many conversations around the fire about politics. And I find myself trying to explain the history of South Africa, where we are now, what we've gone through. What are we? Is it a left? Is it a right country? Is it communist, socialist? What is it? And I end up talking myself in tongues and getting all kind of confused, trying to explain it to Americans, Europeans. Would you mind just providing a very sort of a brief oversight view of the South African politics from, let's say, 94 until sort of where we are now? You know, is it democratically elected? Who's been in charge? How are things going for the past couple of years? And then I think we can sort of build on from there.
Sure, I'll give it a shot. That's a lot, a 30-year period, but quite a bit's happened. So, of course, I think many people probably know that there was a period that the National Party ruled exclusively from 1948 until 1994. And in that period, they introduced the policy of separate development, known by the name that has a very bad reputation now, apartheid, which means separateness. And so that policy, unfortunately, led to a lot of racial legislation that was unfair to much of South Africa's population. And a lot of people look and go, and it was terrible to black South Africans. And it was in many respects, but it wasn't just black South Africans. All South Africans were oppressed by a police state. You know, if it didn't matter if you're white, black, or brown, if you said something against the state, you were banned or imprisoned or chased out of the country. It was worse for black South Africans, who oftentimes had land taken from them or had lower opportunities for education. But it wasn't a blanket sort of thing. It's just, the bottom line is, it's not a good time. And the world finally turned against that. But ultimately, the National Party, seeing the handwriting on the wall, seeing the demographics about being outpopulated and that they couldn't sustain this into perpetuity, decided that, and also the moral wrongness of it, they decided maybe we need to end this. And so in the 1980s, there was an effort to rapprochement with prisoners at Robben Island, including, of course, former President Nelson Mandela, to try to make some progress. And that progress began under the previous president until F.W. de Klerk came along. He took over in 1989 and accelerated this process. In 1992, a referendum was held amongst only white South Africans, and over 60% of white South Africans basically voted. It wasn't, do we end apartheid, but do we change the system of government to a multi-party democracy, and in all race, and that's what they did. And so in 1994, historic elections, April 1994, people lined up for 12 hours standing in line to vote. It was unbelievable, 89% turnout, or so we're told, but it was an amazing day. The National Party survived, and it became the new National Party and got around 20% of the vote, and it wound up going into coalition with the African National Congress, the party that assumed the mantle of leadership under Nelson Mandela. That party has been in rule ever since 1994, 31 years now. It started out, one could argue, a decent, good start. The president talked about reconciliation. It's a rainbow nation. It's everyone's country. Of course, South Africa is a very complicated ethnic background and racial background of black, white, and brown South Africans and people from all over the world who've migrated or were brought there. And so it's you've got basically categories of what people call whites and blacks and coloreds and Indians. Coloreds, of course, being the historical mixed race people. Their origins go back to the 17th century when the Dutch and then the Huguenots and Germans landed in the Western Cape. And, you know, there weren't a lot of ladies around, so there's a little bit of mixing going on, you know, and so next thing you know, and you wind up with a very distinct cultural group, which got more diversified with the inclusion of people from Asia who were brought in as slaves and then mixed in the population, and then others who came later. But that's a very distinct community that has a lot of different branches and sequels of its own. So these groups of people had a new government in 1994, and Mandela was president for one term. One of the smartest things he ever did for African leaders is after one term, he said, I've served. and he stepped off the stage. And he continued to do things after that, but he showed a good example of, instead of being an autocrat who stays in power for 50 or 60 years, like we see in Gabon and in Togo and in places like that, he stepped off the stage. And that looked like South Africa's off to a really good start. He was replaced by a technocrat, his deputy president, Thabo Mbeki, who had a very thin skin and ignored the HIV crisis that exploded into a disaster. South Africa is the world's largest HIV population, over 8 million people HIV positive, at least 4 million living off of antiretrovirals, which is horrible, even more than India, which has 1.6 billion people. So it started well. Then Mbeki came in, he was a technocrat, but he was a very brusque and difficult person to work with. And a lot of people in his own party didn't like him. He was committed to a multi-party democracy with a capital-based market, but that began to change. And what I call the Polokwane massacre, which is a town in Limpopo province in the north, used to be known as Petersburg. I call it the Polokwane massacre. Jacob Zuma orchestrated an overthrow of him at the party conference for the African National Congress. He was unseated as the party leader and then resigned as president. Shortly after that, Jacob Zuma was elected and became the president. And that launched an era of pervasive corruption and theft of the state coffers and destruction of South Africa's institutions, which led us down the road. Eventually, he was replaced by his deputy, which was Cyril Ramaphosa, and everybody got all excited. Yay, it's all better. And they had Ramaphoria, they called it. And I cautioned people in late 2017, early 2018, South Africa has a narrow window of opportunity to change its trajectory to improve life for all of its citizens, but only if Cyril Ramaphosa is serious. And I said I wasn't entirely convinced he was serious, and sadly, I was correct. South Africa has gone from one bad situation to another. Right after that, we had COVID, one of the most stringent and brutal and oppressive lockdowns on the planet, arresting mothers nursing their children on a sidewalk and putting them in prison, endangering the child and the mother, all sorts of things. Stealing care packages from people trying to deliver to the starving, and then taking it home to government officials' homes and then using it themselves or selling it. It's unbelievable. The government criminalized over 260,000 South Africans, the vast majority of them minorities, whites and coloreds and Indians, in effort to, I'm not sure what their effort was to do. But the country has a lot of problems. One of the most unequal societies in the world. And the problem with all this, Jonah, is that these are, in my view, all own goals. There's no need for any of this. South Africa has immense natural wealth, immense tourism opportunity potential, immense harbors and resources. And once upon a time, it had incredible human capital. It still has a fair amount, but much of that human capital is in Canary Wharf. It's in Canberra. It's in Auckland. It's in New York. It's all over the world instead of in South Africa. The number of South Africans in the Emirates and in Taiwan and in Thailand and China is off the charts. And of course, they're making all those countries wealthy and having a life. But really, South Africans should be in South Africa, making South Africa a better place. So it's really sad, like Zimbabwe, to see so much human capital outside the country. Now, I don't mean to paint a total desperate picture of South Africa. Despite all these challenges, the people of South Africa, whether they're Xhosa, Venda, Zulu, Afrikaner, Portuguese, German, Tswana, it doesn't matter. Incredible people, lots of people of faith, people of great unity, people who don't care about the nonsense. But everything in South Africa, from a politician's standpoint, is run through a racial lens, and that taints everything. Most people in the street don't give a flying flip about race unless they're the social media paid trolls or glitterati or the legacy media or politicians. That's all you hear. South Africa, racism, illegal, land is stolen. And the story is very much different than that. I've been all over South Africa, every province, and I interacted with tens of thousands of South Africans. I've been to South Africa probably 400 or 500 times over the past 30 years. And since the end of the COVID scam, yes, the scam, political scam, I've been back to South Africa on several trips where I go from a month to 6 weeks, and I do meet and greets with South Africans. I meet black, white, brown South Africans. I go to the townships. You can't go here, you're white. Why not? And I go to leafy suburbs. I don't get to hang out in the places where the rich politicians are with their big luxury mansions in Sandton City, but I do go to quite a few places. So look, there's hope for South Africa. And from a tourist standpoint, it's amazing, but I will give a word of caution. And I hope I don't upset your viewers. And we can, if we have to, we could delete this from the interview later on. But when you go to South Africa, don't be a tourist. Let me explain what I mean. Be aware of your surroundings, know where you're going, know what's going on. If you're aware of what's going on, you'll be okay. In most cases, it's going to be fine. I don't want to scare people, but if you are like the tourist in Venice, then you're going to set yourself up for trouble because a lot of people are desperate and there's a lot of crime that takes place. But it is an amazing place, and if you're a hunter, the odds are you're in a place where it's pretty safe. Plus, you're armed.
Yes, sir. But you see why I brought Colonel Chris on, because that was absolutely phenomenal, and you did a great job. I hope you can snip at that one and put it on your YouTube channels and explain it for South Africa, because you mentioned so much there that is so important about South Africa and shape, the way we are. You mentioned this constant bringing up of racial terms. It's apartheid's problem. It's Jan van Riebeck's fault. It's the whites. It's the colored. We can't do this. We can't do that. And we've had that same party for the past 30 odd years since 1994, the African National Congress, excuse me, ANC, as you said. And yet we're still constantly being fed these lies of the injustices of the past. We haven't done this because of what happened then. We can't move forward until we address this. And the biggest, in my opinion, kick in the balls we've received recently is the expropriation bill, which was signed in only a few days ago. And one of the things that I really enjoy about your videos is that the way you put your argument across is very well balanced, very down the middle. And I can see from the comments on your YouTube channel, which is extremely popular, you get that same sentiment from South Africans. They tend to agree, they understand, but yet the politicians constantly feed us this absolute garbage and sheer lies. Are we as South Africans ever going to reach the point where the government can say, okay, it's been long enough. It's been 60 years, 70 years, 80 years. It's not apartheid's fault anymore. It's the ANC, it's the GNU, it's all these things. Where do you see South Africa going forward now from where it's been?
Well, I think South Africa is at an inflection point right now. This is truly the moment in history. The previous moment in histories were Sharpeville, 1960, before any of us were born. I mean, there might be some listeners out there who were born then, but you and I weren't. I'm not that old. But that's a pretty sad situation. But it's also been politically manipulated. But it was a real situation. It did happen. And then, of course, 1976, the Soweto riots over the imposition of Afrikaans medium instruction. And then 85, when the country nearly went under, it took a heck of an effort by the police and military to quell the violence that lasted for 9 months. Those were inflection points. And then I would say 1992, when the referendum came, that changed the trajectory, and that led to the CODESA conference, the Convention for Democratic South Africa, that put the framework in place that led to where we are now with this sort of government. I think we're at an inflection point here where South Africa is either going to change or it's just going to continue to go the path of Zimbabwe, the DRC, and other failed states in Africa like Somalia. And it's really, and people are going to go, wait, how can you compare it to Somalia? I'm not comparing it to Somalia. I'm comparing a failed state. That's what I'm getting at. I mean, it is a failed state. I mean, the rails are destroyed. It used to have the most efficient and effective rails in Africa. You transport goods all over, low cost and inexpensive. They're completely destroyed. I have photographs of them from all over the country with the rails ripped up, the communications lines torn down. Then you've also got roads with potholes the size of craters that look like sinkholes. You've got the roads wearing out quickly because all the traffic from the busiest port in Durban is on the highway going through the Van Reenen Pass, which is incredibly deadly and dangerous, a very steep hill where trucks just whip out in front of you going 10 kilometers an hour when traffic's going 120. It's insane. The water is a mess, is a situation. Sanitation's a mess. The list goes on and on. So it's at an inflection point, but it's unfortunate if people look at this, if they pay attention, they're honest, they won't fall for the nonsense the politicians are telling them that, well, this is all because of apartheid and historical inequities and this, that, and the other. The African National Congress said 30 years to right the ship. In 1994, when I was a young officer, I just made captain then. People asked about South Africa because they knew I had an interest and I was following it and I had intent to become a specialist for Africa in the Army. I would tell people, I said, South Africa's got three paths they've got to follow. Number one, they have to develop a national sovereign wealth fund and take the money that comes into that from equity stakes that are given out or money that accrues into it or grants are given. And any payouts that come from that in the form of dividends, they can issue a payout to South Africa. It's kind of like the Alaska Permanent Fund. The state of Alaska has oil revenue, and the money that comes into oil, they pay out to every resident. Every year they get a payout from that, which is kind of cool. Now, in South Africa's case, I said because of the wealth disparity and the Gini coefficient being so broad, such a difference between the wealthiest and the poorest, that it would be fair and smart to do this on an income basis. So if you're an adult and you have an income below a certain threshold, you would get the check. Everybody would get a statement saying, if you make more than this, you don't get anything. And this would make it an ownership society. So even the poorest people in South Africa would have a piece of Sanlam and Old Mutual and Barrick and Anglo Gold now. But they would have a piece of all this and they would see it and become an ownership society rather than a beggar dependent society. National Sovereign Wealth Fund. Number two, you have to fix the police. The police under apartheid were very good at what they did. They oppressed the liberation movements. They're very good at that. And they protected the minorities, particularly white minorities. So most white South Africans at the end of apartheid are like, what are you talking about? Crime? No, this is a wonderful country. Yeah, because people are kept out of your neighborhoods and they got passed laws. They got to go home at night, and it's a safe place to be if you're white. So the police were very good at that. What they need to do is turn that into a public policing organization where police aren't riding around in cars, but they're walking the streets of Peter Maritzburg, or walking the streets of Durban, and people trust the cops. Hey, Sile over there, he's selling drugs, but, not worry about stitches or snitches get stitches, but have trust in the police. But instead, they develop a police force that's understaffed, underpaid, ill-equipped, poor forensics, no DNA capability for years, and crime just ran rampant. Plus, we had a lot of cops that were put in positions they weren't qualified for. They created a general officer structure trying to emulate the military like they're special. And policing has been a disaster. And then so is the criminal justice system. So that's the second thing, sovereign wealth fund, policing. And the third thing they needed to do was fix education. Under apartheid education, you had the best private schools in the world, Eton and then South Africa. That's where people sent their kids from all over the world. They went to South Africa, not just in Africa, to get world-class educations. And that system the private schools are still there in many respects, but the public schools were pretty good too. If you were white, not so great if you're colored Indian. And that's a general statement. There's good and bad schools all over. But most black kids didn't get a fair shot at getting a good education, but not all. Dr. Zweli Mkhize, who used to be the health minister in South Africa, grew up in apartheid South Africa. He's black. He went to public school. He went to high school in South Africa. He went to university in South Africa. He went to medical school in South Africa, and he practiced medicine in South Africa under apartheid, not since then. So it was all the place. Those are the three things that had to be fixed. Unfortunately, the ANC has pissed this all down the drain. They have proven since the overthrow of Thabo Mbeki, and look, I'm not a fan of Thabo Mbeki, so don't infer that I'm saying that was a good period in South Africa's history. It was okay. There were problems. But since the overthrow and Jacob Zuma came into power, South Africa's been on a downward trajectory of kleptocracy, theft, and just wholesale corruption. When Tony Yangeni was in parliament in the late 1990s, early 2000s, he got caught in a corrupt deal, and he got like a discount on a loan to buy a car for like, $5,000 equivalent, 60,000 rand at the time, I think it was, something like that. That's the kind of corruption you have back then. Now you have billions of dollars that are looted, and it's insane. I could run through a list of corruption scandals in Conla, the Travelgate, Oilgate. They sold off the National Oil Reserve to a tender company that is tied to the political party, and so now they have all the oil. The country owns no strategic reserve, and the country pays them to maintain it in case so they could use it. And then you have so many more. The PPE scandals during COVID, the Vreda Dairy Farm scandal, the 250 million rand asbestos deal in the Free State with Ace Magashule, Zandile Gumeda, the former mayor of Durban, Itequini, 78 counts of fraud, still not prosecuted. The current deputy president lives in a 28 million rand mansion. He's never made that much money in his life. That's one mansion he has in Cape Town. He's another one in Pretoria. The president stuffing $560,000 cash in his sofa at his Pala Pala game ranch. Shall I continue? Anyway, but I think you asked me if there's hope for South Africa. If there is, I'll pause for a second and we'll come back to that.
Well, everything you've just mentioned now, taking all of that together, I think we noticed with the recent presidential elections in the US, everything was tagged. You're either a leftist liberal, far-right Nazi, woke, you're this side or that side. What tags would best explain South Africa's current situation and our current government? I know for those that might have been able to catch up, at the moment we're in a GNU, a government of national unity. So we've got a bit of a multi-party ruling going on, if I can call that. But what sort of tags could you put to South Africa in its current state at the moment? Are we left? Are we right? Center? What are we?
You're way over there left. Way over there left. Not even remotely near the center. It's interesting. The opposition party for years has been the Democratic Alliance, which grew out of the Independent Democrats. It has a tradition going back to being the lone party that opposed apartheid for many, many years. Helen Suzman was their representative, and then that eventually became another party. And that's the origins of what stays the Democratic Alliance. Democratic Alliance is often portrayed and maligned as a white party, but only 1/3 of the support comes from white voters, 1/3 comes from so-called color voters, and about 1/3 comes from black voters. But that is a left of center traditional liberal party that's in favor of pushing gay rights, that's in favor of traditions of free speech. And also the thing about them when I say the left of center is they don't mind big government. They don't mind parastatals and state-owned enterprises. They just think they can run them better. That's their position on it. And so that party's been in opposition. And any time for the past 15 years that the ANC's done something wrong, they've been standing there pointing it out. Helen Zilla, and then they had Musi Maimani, and then we got John Steenhuisen, and the ANC is doing this wrong, and we won't do that. We have a red line. We won't accept expropriation without compensation. We won't accept this. We won't accept that. Well, last year, the ANC was finally driven below 50% in the national vote. Now, in November of 2021, when they had the municipal elections, I predicted the week after the elections that the ANC would get no more than 38 to 42% of the vote in 2024. And people told me I was crazy. You know what you're talking about. You're just American. You don't know anything about South Africa. You don't know anything about elections. Oh, trust me, I know a lot about elections. I'm an analyst, an intelligence analyst. But anyway, so I stuck to that for a number of factors. The truth changed from November 2021 until May of 2024. But my analysis didn't change because the underlying factors still led me to believe they're going to come in at 38 to 42. And lo and behold, the ANC got only 40% of the vote. And part of that was driven by the low turnout, which I expected. So the Democratic Alliance crowed about how well they did, but they actually lost voters. They have fewer voters, many fewer voters than the previous time. So they kind of stagnated, although they claim they gained, but they didn't gain. So the ANC, you would think they'd be humble. They don't have a majority, so they need someone to go in a coalition with them. Well, there's some opposition parties that are really comprised of people that used to be part of the ANC, like the Mkhonto we Sizwe party led by Jacob Zuma, which got 14.6% of the vote. Shocked a lot of people, not me. The only thing that shocked me is how well they did in KwaZulu-Natal, their home, their heartland on the east coast of South Africa. They did better than I thought. I thought they get 30%, they got 45% there. But I wasn't surprised at 15% nationally. And then the Economic Freedom Fighters. These are both parties that came out of the ANC. They're both very left of center about expropriation and nationalization and chase the white people into the ocean and revenge politics for the most part. So there was no real alternative for the African National Congress. The party of Jacob Zuma is a guy who hates the ANC but wants to be in the ANC because he was kicked out of it. And there's no way they're going to ally with him because he'll just eat the party from the inside in a coalition. So that's out. So that 14% is gone. And the Economic Freedom Fighters are a party led by a malcontent named as Julius Malema. I call him Juju, the inconvenient youth. And Juju is a bit of a buffoon and a dangerous character who race hustles all the time. I honestly don't think he's actually a racist. He's just an opportunist. He uses his stuff. They got about 9% of the vote. They declined. This is their worst performance since they first started over a decade ago. And they're really becoming less of a factor in politics. And so they're searching for a place. But they are adamantly opposed to the current president. And so it's unlikely with that coalition. That meant that really the only option was to go ANC 40%, Democratic Alliance with 21%. That gets them over to 50%. They can vote. They can vote for president because South Africans don't choose their president, folks. If you don't know that, it's a parliamentary system. Despite it's not a prime minister, it's called a president. That's because he has executive powers, but he's really just a prime minister in effect because the foreign members of the parliament select the president, not the 63 million South Africans or 41 million eligible voters or the 20 million who bother voting. So nobody picked Ramaphosa. That was the parliament did that. So anyway, the only real option was with them. But now the ANC was clever. You would think that the party that dropped from 69% of the vote 15, 20 years ago to 40% of the vote would have been a little humble and said, you know what, maybe we're doing something wrong here. Hey, Cyril, how do we fix this? No. They're clever. They're clever communists. They decided, okay, hey, look, we'll invite the DA in. They reached an agreement between the two parties for a coalition. Then they went out and grabbed a bunch of these little parties and said, hey, it's a government of national unity. And they gave them little posts and cabinet positions. Look, 10 parties. We have 70% of the vote. It's everybody's on board. And then the ANC has ruled since then as if they're the only party in power. They have pushed through and signed legislation that was approved by the previous parliament, but then held so they wouldn't lose more votes in the election. And then after the election, with the new coalition, they've come out with these laws, including the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act, which steals the authority from local school boards and gives it to provincial and national level to rule and determine. It forces schools to teach in English, even though only 6% of South Africans speak English as a first language. That might be a surprise to your American audience. Only 6% of South Africans speak as first language. A lot of South Africans speak English in self-defense. It's a second language. But now they're going to send 5- and 6-year-olds to school who've never spoke a word of English, and they'd be introduced to English, and every subject's taught in English their first year in school. It's a disaster. It also is a cultural destruction. We saw what happened in England or in the United Kingdom with Welsh nearly being destroyed. Manx is gone. Cornish is gone. Welsh has survived, but just barely hung on, and Scots Gaelic has survived. But the point is that when you take the first language out of school, that's when you destroy culture. So that bill is out there. That's now law. And the Democratic Alliance is part of that. They said we won't go for that. Then you've got on top of that, you've got this 3% black tax. So Parks Tao, who's one of their ministers, just proposed something. We're going to require all corporations after profit 3% tax, which will go into a big fund of 100 billion rand. Yes, I feel like Trump here. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to put this 100 billion rand in there, and then that corporation tax will go to fund black businesses. Has to be owned by a black person. Now, how is that just and equitable? And that also flies in the face of South Africa's constitution, which calls for non-racialism. It's racist is what it is. And it also forces a company to fund its potential competitor, because unless you are a majority black-owned business or have a certain threshold in certain industries of black ownership of your shares, you can't compete for government contracts. The South African government is half the economy. So you take half the economy off the table, and now the people that can't compete in half the economy have to fund their competition who can compete there. It's insane. And no one's saying anything about this. That's pretty scary. But the one that's broke the camel's back, the straw, is this expropriation without compensation. It's we'll get into that in a second here, but it's a total lie. It's being portrayed as a race thing, and it's evening the scores and historical inadequacies. It's all total nonsense, just like it was in Zimbabwe. And I can tell your audience about Zimbabwe, that's a total crock too. Almost half the farmland there was bought after the black government came control of Zimbabwe with the approval of black government and their consent, and then they stole the land from people claiming that they had stolen 100 years prior. Same thing is happening in South Africa now. The South African government has actually spent almost 30 billion rand. Actually, I've seen figures today that update that because I had outdated information. 58 billion rand, purchasing 4 million hectares of land in South Africa. Virtually all the land they've purchased is either remaining in government hands or has been turned over to people who are unable or unwilling to farm it properly and use it, and it's all fallen apart. There are some really sad stories about the Ponderosa farm in KwaZulu-Natal and Dawn farm there. It's horrific. So this expropriation without compensation is the straw that broke the camel's back. And if South Africans don't stand up and stop this from being executed, and if they fall for the nonsense that's going on now, like all the stuff coming out of South Africa right now is like, oh, Donald Trump attacked South Africa. No, he didn't. He said, look, they're expropriating land, and we are not going to give future financial assistance to South Africa. Well, that's not an attack. That's just saying that we're not giving you money. He also said we're freezing money all over the world. He wants to do away with USAID. Pay attention to the game. Read the room. America is no longer giving its money away. We are $2 trillion in deficit last year. We've got problems. Got to fix at home. Maybe one day we fix it. We'll give you back money. But in the meantime, you're acting very poorly and violating agreements we have. So we're not going to give you money. That's not an attack. That's just telling you, hey, we're not suckers any longer.
Yeah, and I think I listened to you recently when you're on the Gareth Cliff show. Now, for those of you who don't realize, Gareth Cliff is one of the more famous radio DJs from South Africa. He currently has probably the biggest podcast in South Africa. He's probably our sort of Joe Rogan, if I could say that. Very outspoken, very intelligent guy, has a great show. And he summed it up best when he said that sort of eye of Sauron from Donald Trump shifted and focused on South Africa for that very specific moment. And I'm always going to remember this moment when he was at the Air Force Base. I'm not sure what the name it is. You will know when one of the reporters said to him,
Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. When the reporter said to him, you've threatened to take away aid from South Africa, are you going to do it to any other African country? And he outright said, no, I will not. And for me, that was a serious finger in the face of South Africa, in the face of the ANC and Ramaphosa to say, the rest of the world no longer views you as this big, beautiful rainbow nation, the Mandela legacy, you can get away with whatever you want. Your time is coming up now. Now, what has that done in terms of South Africa and US relations? I know recently that, is it Marco Rubio? I think I might be wrong there. They've recently said, not coming to the G20 summit, which has been held in South Africa. How big of an impact will that have on relations between the US and South Africa? Is South Africa in a bit of a hard place? We tend to be more with the Chinese and the Russians, but now we've got the US putting pressure on us. Is Ramaphosa literally between a rock and a hard place here?
Well, he is, and he's too stupid to realize it. I mean, what did he do in his State of the Nation address today? He came out and attacked America. We will not be bullied. Nobody bullied you. We're stopping foreign assistance. We don't have any damn money. Are you not paying attention? $2 trillion deficit spending. We have 37. That is larger than the global GDP of 90% of the countries. Our total debt. It's insane. This economy is only 28, 29 trillion in size, and now our federal debt is larger than our economy. It's insane. We have to get control of this. And look, South Africa brought this on themselves. The talk is that this goes now that the smart people, the coffee table analysts, the professors who didn't learn anything and went to school and have PhDs in South Africa and in Europe are running around going, well, this is probably because of South Africa's stance on Israel and Gaza. Yeah, that's part of it. But there's a whole host of problems here. First off, we have something called the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. It is a trade agreement that allows goods from countries in Africa that agree to meet certain governance standards voluntarily. In other words, we expect you to spend, enough money to provide health care for your population and education standards to reach standards and have free and fair democratic elections and have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. I mean, they're not big asks. These are traditional liberal values. So the AGOA law, it's a law here, requires that to be the case. And then what happens is that these countries sign up to it. As long as they meet the standards, we let them have duty-free access. No duty. Your goods enter America with no taxes. They come right into the marketplace. So Western Cape wine producers send their wine, no duty. BMW parts are made in Pretoria North, or VW parts are made in PE, shipped to America, no duty. And a host of other goods and services come in here, no duty. We get no reciprocity, by the way. People, the South Africans don't know what you're talking about. Oh, well, they can have it going. Yeah, we'll see. America suffers. Hey, dude, we get nothing from it. By the way, if a bottle of wine at the local package store, which is run by the state here, by the way, talk about communism, but it's not, my state has a freaking state control over liquor stores. But if I go to the package store about 1.5 kilometers from my house, I could walk there half straight, Anyway, but if I go there and get a bottle of wine from South Africa, and they don't have many good selections from South Africa, I'll have to pay, get this, you ready for this, Jono? An additional 2%. That's going to break me. I'll tell you, on a $10 bottle of wine, that's 20 cents. I don't think I can make it. So my point here is that we don't need your goods. Okay. Even the minerals, and Gwede Mantashe, the minerals minister, they won't give us the money. We won't give them minerals. Hey, genius. You don't give us the minerals. We spend $430 million a year buying the minerals from you. And if you think you got us over a barrel on chromium, we only need $31 million chromium. Do you know how much chromium that is? That would fit my front lawn every year. That's not much. The real issue is platinum, but we can get it from elsewhere. We don't need it from South Africa. Mm-hmm. It's also a fungible commodity traded in the world marketplace. We can buy it from someone else. And a third party will buy it, ship it somewhere else, and then sell it to us. So get over yourself. You've got no leverage here. You get advantages because of the Rainbow Nation, the miracle of 1994, the end of apartheid, and the stupid image in people's heads of what South Africa was 30 years ago, not what it is in 2025. I had to think what year it was, 2025. So you get duty-free access to our marketplace. We get no reciprocity. We don't even ask for it. We're not asking. We ship our stuff. We send software from Google or phones or, whatever, medical supplies and x-ray machines and MRI machines to South Africa. We have to pay duty on it. I sent a box to someone in South Africa during lockdown. I had to pay $320 some for DHL overnighting it. It was less than a kilo. It was they wanted some Trump hats. It was the election 2020. And they wanted some Starbucks, pumpkin spice latte sachets because they hadn't got those there yet. Okay. So it was worth less than $100. I paid $300 to get there. Now they reimbursed me because they wanted it. I'm not crazy. I'm not going to send that there. So $300 to get there, but that's not to South Africa. So now it arrives 2 days later after I ship it. Then it sits in Cape Town for 6 weeks because they demand $400 in duty taxes to bring it into the country. It was worth $75. Eventually, it was delivered 6 weeks later, but only after, I think somebody probably paid a bribe to get it. But my point is that we don't get the reciprocity. And here's a perfect example of this. Americans don't eat chicken feet. I don't eat chicken feet. I used to raise poultry. You know what they do with his feet? I'm not eating that stuff. But South Africans love chicken feet. A lot of Africans love chicken feet. So American producers were thrown away. Then they realized, hey, there's a market in South Africa. Oh, they got a modern economy. We can ship it there. So we start shipping there, and we got accused of dumping them in South Africa because our poultry manufacturers are industrial. They have millions of chickens, and they can ship the stuff at cost and freeze it to South Africa far below South African producers. And it's not dumping. It's just, so what happened is that the South African government imposed a 75% tariff on us. 75. The cheek. Well, but anyway, so that's just one example. And it's but two-way trade, South Africa and U.S. was South Africa's historically throughout its history, its largest trading partner until 2014 when China surpassed us a little over a decade ago. But we're still the second largest trading partner with over $20 billion in two-way trade every year. So I ask you this, if you want to, in an economy that's just $400 billion a year, if you want to piss down the drain $20 billion in trade, if you want to write off 4% of your overseas mineral sales every year, if you want to piss down the drain $500 million of free aid that goes to NGOs and third parties in your country to take care of HIV and help with gender-based violence and communications and trade, if you want to piss all that down the drain with your arrogant attitude by poking Donald Trump in the eye, then bring it on. Because we're not attacking South Africa, but The attack is coming from Cyril Ramaphosa, the academics, the media, the people like Philip DeVette at News 24 and Stephen Hertz at the Daily Maverick. They're the ones doing the attack on America. We're simply telling you this is how it is. You piss on us, we're not going to give you money for free. The Lady R incident, which South Africa ignored diplomatic overtures for 7 months before Ambassador Brigney finally went to the public and said, hey, they were shipping arms to Russia. They were shipping something. There's people with photographs and video. We saw it from Simonstown. They tried to did a bogus investigation. Their position in support of Tehran, Cuba, Beijing, Moscow, and flying that in the face of the United States, their support for Hamas, their bogus genocide case against Israel, when they didn't join the Gambia's case for genocide against Myanmar and its genocide of the Rohingya, they have never once said anything about the Chinese genocide of the Muslim Uyghurs in China. They never did anything to stand up for Rwanda in 1994. In fact, they took genocideers and gave them refuge in South Africa. People were wanted by the courts for their genocide, and they gave them refuge here. They said nothing about the genocide in Darfur. They are hypocrites of the highest order, the ANC. And now the opposition is co-opted. They're part of it. So, if you want to poke the bear, good luck. If you think America can't go without South Africa, you really have no grasp of the world. Now, look, Jono, you've watched my program. I love South Africa, and I love South Africans. I'm heart sore that we're having this conversation. This was wholly unnecessary. It's an own goal. It's like Cyril stands at midfield, and he has all his players come up, and he turns around, looks at his goal, and he points to the stand, says, hey, go and look over there, and he kicks the ball in his own net. That's what he's doing. It's dumb beyond belief.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Colonel. And for those listening, I cannot encourage more than enough to go head over to Colonel Chris Wyatt's YouTube page. I think you can just find it there. His videos are incredibly insightful into the situation. He breaks it down really well. I'd kind of just like to wrap up with two final questions. The first one is, I'd love to get your thoughts on Elon Musk and Donald Trump's relationship. I still see a lot of South Africans are kind of holding on to this hope that Elon Musk is going to come back and be South Africa's version of Donald Trump and save the country. I have my own opinions that he wants absolutely nothing to do with us. I mean, why would he? Is he at the same time kind of whispering in Donald Trump's ear about South Africa? I know his mother's still very involved. She often tweets about South Africa. His father's still here. Does he kind of have one foot here in South Africa while whispering to Donald Trump? And does South Africa have its own Donald Trump? Will we ever get a Donald Trump with all of our parties being so left-sided? What are your kind of thoughts on that? I'll be fascinated to know.
Well, you've had a few people that are kind of Trump-esque, but they're from very minor parties and don't get a lot of attention, and also some of them have baggage. Okay. So that's a challenge in South Africa. If Jacob Zuma wasn't such a loser, he could have been kind of a Donald Trump, but he was just more interested in corruption. True. Yeah, because he had the gravitas. He's not an attractive fellow. He's not articulate, but people glom onto him. They like him, personally. So that guy could have done it. But so far as Elon Musk, first off, people are really taking 2 and 2 and coming up with 37. I don't know what math they're doing. Mm-hmm. Okay, first off, two things are happening here with this situation right now. It's AfriForum's fault. No, it's not. AfriForum has been lobbying American politicians for a decade, and now suddenly it changes. Do you think AfriForum is responsible for Donald Trump, deciding not to provide future aid? No, it's not AfriForum. When AfriForum had their biggest success influencing American politicians, they came back here and they actually got Ernst Rutz went on to Tucker Carlson and talked about farm murders, and that was it. That we didn't talk about it anymore. That was it. And then Donald Trump did a tweet, because Tucker Carlson knew somebody that knew Trump, and he did a tweet. And it was not a very articulate tweet, and it didn't help. And then South Africans like, yay, Trump's going to save us. Trump ain't going to save you that time. So Elon Musk is not the proximate cause of why Trump did this. Those things I just talked about are the proximate cause. And the ANC is in charge of the G20, and the Americans under Trump are not going to give the ANC extra attention when they want to talk about solidarity and Ubuntu for the global South. The G20 is an abomination, in my view. The G7 was an effective. You can't have a group that continually expands. Look at the G20. The BRICS members are in it. They're all in it. The only one that's not evil is India. Brazil, an authoritarian state. Russia, an authoritarian state. China, a communist authoritarian state. South African authoritarian state. That leaves only India, the world's largest democracy, which is a total mess. And its economy is only $3.75 trillion per year. That's a rounding figure. 1.6 billion people and it's $4 trillion. My goodness, the Germans have an economy almost that size with just 80 million people. So, it's I don't think that that we're really going to let me get back to Musk. Sorry, I got off track there. So Elon Musk is not the proximate cause. He doesn't have one foot in South Africa and one foot in the United States. He is 100% in the United States. He's actually 100% in here and in space. The guy is everywhere. But South Africa is not a primary concern for him. I'm sure, no doubt, Trump probably turns to him and says, Elon, you know, you grew up, you went to high school in Pretoria. Tell me what it's really like. Is it big? Is it better? You know, whatever. I can't do a good Trump impersonation, but I'm sure he says those conversations with him. But from what I've seen, Musk doesn't have unfettered access or control that everyone's giving him credit for right now. He's simply identifying things that are just abusive, and it's like a virus. The system is rebelling against the cure, and people don't like it. But this has all been on the table for a long time. And, you know, if you go back, I've been playing a video from 7 years ago when Cyril Ramaphosa was campaigning. And Donald Trump, I don't know what he knows about something. He's never been here. He can kick his American, keep it, leave us alone. Dude, we are leaving you alone. No more aid. You're on your own. Have fun. But this isn't because of Musk, although Musk may have a small role in it. I would be more concerned if I was a South African politician, if I was an astute South African politician, of which there aren't very many apparently. I would be more concerned about Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is incredibly powerful. He is the chair of the Africa Subcommittee on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and the Republicans control the Senate and they control the House. And if South Africa keeps poking America in the eye and lying about what Donald Trump's position is and distorting this and trying to turn this into a race thing when it's not, expropriation without compensation is about political power. It's not about farmland. It's about property. The Constitution clearly says they can expropriate property with just and equitable compensation when it's in the public interest. This law allows them to take property with no compensation. That's in direct violation of the Constitution. That'll have to be decided at some point. But you're poking us in the eye, and property rights are a hallmark of the AGOA agreement. If you don't respect property rights, you abrogate them, you can't be an AGOA. So that's next. And I guarantee you that Ted Cruz, if he isn't already doing it, will be pushing for Donald Trump to suspend South Africa from the AGOA agreement. I had hoped that Rubio would go to the G20 summit, and that would give South Africa 3 weeks to file a Section 80 constitutional challenge, because you have 30 days to do that after the president signs the law, and then it would go immediately to the Constitutional Court and would likely be declared unconstitutional. But it looks like that's not going to happen. 2 weeks have elapsed and almost no movement on that, and now Rubio's not going. We will have a delegation there, but it won't be the Secretary of State. It'll be somebody that's less important. And watch what happens. Now, I wish I was there. I'm accredited as a journalist with the South African government. I was at the BRICS summit there last time in 2023. Okay. But let me tell you something. I wish I was there. I don't have the time or money to go there because I'm self-funded right now. But I would go and I would cover the G20 summit, and I would be watching to see how they treat the American delegation. And I guarantee you that the South African government will be dismissive because it's not the Secretary of State, and they will treat them like crap. And when they do that, if we haven't already taken them out of AGOA, that's when it'll happen.
That's fascinating. Absolutely incredible insight. Thank you for breaking that down. Now, I'm going to end off with just one more question because I want to be respectful of your time. And again, thank you very much for doing this. I know it's late. I just heard my kiddos running down the hallway to bed, so I'm going to go have my hands full in a minute just now. But again, thank you very much. Of course, this is an Africa hunting podcast, and you know I always try and promote as many international hunters coming to South Africa, enjoying South Africa, everything it has to offer. But when the news broke between the US and South Africa and the expropriation bill, I don't know how many emails and text messages I got from a lot of past clients. What does this all mean? Where's the country going? I'm getting ready to book a hunt for next year. I want to take my family, my kids. What does it all mean? And I keep trying to tell them that the people of South Africa are never truly reflected in the news that you hear. Everyone in South Africa is extremely welcoming, extremely friendly, an amazing place for tourism, for conservation, for wildlife. Would you agree, or would you have different thoughts that a lot of the sort of hoo-ha that we hear in the news tends to not affect a lot of the day-to-day efforts of South Africans? Good people working hard, still relies heavily on tourism, and that at least for the next year, 2 years, 3 years going forward, it's still going to be a country that is welcoming to international tourists and people from all over the world.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't discourage anybody from planning a trip to South Africa. Just like I said, just be smart about where you're at and where you're going, and be careful with your credit cards, your wallets, your security. I mean, just use good judgment. Military people know what I'm talking about. You always pay attention to what's going around. Keep your spidey sense about you. But look, especially when it comes to hunting, hunting in South Africa took a bit of a hit. You used to be able to go to Zimbabwe and Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa and do fantastic hunting. But with the arrival of Ian Khama, whom I know, the former president of Botswana, a conservationist, he put a ban on big game hunting, and Botswana was well known for it, and that destroyed that industry. It's just now starting to come back. Zimbabwe, because of the theft of farms and the murder of farmers and the collapse of the economy, people were forced to eat the wildlife, and they stripped the national parks of much of the wildlife, and the hunting disappeared in many places. And that hasn't recovered yet. Namibia is still a great place to go for game hunting, but we're here about South Africa. So I encourage you to go to South Africa. Lots of world-class opportunities to do hunting, and it's an amazing place. If you're into hunting, you also got some real challenges in South Africa. You get out there in the bush, it's not always easy to see that prey that you're hunting for. And if you get out there, look, you go hunting in Canada, you go after some game there. You go hunting in America after some game. But where do you get to go after kudu except in Africa, man? Come on, kudu are amazing. It's a great opportunity. So I would encourage people to continue to plan for it. You can always adjust your fire if you have to. No pun intended. Adjust your fire. Down 2 over 1. It's just you shot a little bit long on that one. But if something comes up, and it becomes untenable in the future, don't plan your trip a year from now or 2 years from now based on the political machinations taking place right now. There's a very real possibility that the ANC will blink and that this will all be sorted out. Right now, all that's happened is that President Trump has said, we have no money. We're not giving aid to South Africa next year, not this year, but next year and in the future. And that's it. And that doesn't affect it doesn't affect the hunting at all. The only thing that would affect the hunting is if game lodges are expropriated, and that has happened in the past. They've done that. So, but I would have a positive outlook there, and I wish everyone a safe journey and a good trip. And if you happen to be in the country on one of my trips, because I announce them on my channel all the time, and I tell people where I'm going to be at, I do meet and greets. I'd love to meet any of your guests or your listeners, I should say, your listeners who rock up in South Africa and happen to be in a place where I'm at, whether it's in Uppington or Pretoria or wherever it may be, and you can join us for a meet and greet. We always have a lekker time, as we like to say.
Fantastic. And what's the best way that the listeners can follow you? Obviously, you've got an incredible YouTube channel, but have you got other social media medias that can follow you?
Sure. A place I kind of neglected for almost 20 years since I've had the account. I've had multiple accounts on Twitter because it used to be just a terrible cesspool. Not that it's much better now, but I just gotten a lot of traction this past week on Twitter. You can find me at WMW Chris. That's my initials, William Martin Wyatt and Chris, because I was born on Christmas Day. On Twitter, that's my handle. And then the best place to find me is on YouTube until I get censored again. That's at Colonel Chris Wyatt. And that's the main channel. And then for U.S. news, U.S. politics, my original channel, which was removed from YouTube over violation I'd ever committed back in 2021 and in the gulag for 2 years. I finally got it back 23 months later. That's at Real Chris Wyatt. I'm on everything. I got Substack. I got it all. I'm on Rumble and Odyssey, everything under the sun. But the biggest one is you'll find me on YouTube. That's the best place to find me.
Well, Colonel, I am a big fan. And I just want to say that as a South African, I truly appreciate everything that you're putting out there and spreading the news. It really does mean a lot to us. And thank you very much for joining me on a non-political hunting podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Bye-bye, donkey, for having me as a guest. I appreciate it. And I hope that your listeners found it interesting.